I wasn't looking for anything unusual. It was late, later than I usually stayed up. One of those nights where the world feels just a little off-center. I'd had the radio on more out of habit than curiosity. Background hum, static lullabies. Most stations were either dead air or long loops of jazz and tired preachers speaking into empty sanctuaries. And then I landed on something else. The frequency was perfect, not a hint of noise. No call letters, no intro music. Just a voice. Deep, smooth. Every syllable rolled like it had been rehearsed for centuries. Confident, polished, but not rushed. Good evening to those who thrive beneath the hush of the world. I froze. There was something wrong with it. It wasn't distorted or robotic, but it was too perfect. Each word was deliberate, but not stiff. It was like silk cut with razors. The voice went on. You're tuned to the night feed. No commercials. No interruptions. No sunrise. Just me, your familiar whisper in the dark. If you're really listening, you know this broadcast isn't meant for just anyone. I remember turning the volume down. Not because I was scared. Not yet. But because something about it felt private. Like I'd walked into the middle of a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. For our newer blooded, tonight's lesson is simple. How to hunt with dignity. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. Because suddenly, I wasn't hearing a late-night DJ or a dramatized podcast. I was hearing something else. The voice laughed softly, not mocking. Amused like someone who'd lived long enough to find most things trivial. Still, there was a hunger behind it. Not aggressive. Patient. There's an art to feeding. It's not about thirst. That's amateur thinking. The hunger is sacred. The feed, ritual. And those who forget that, they leave trails. They stir questions. They break the rhythm. Then silence. Not the kind that suggests a break. The kind that makes you check behind you. The voice returned. And if you're listening from outside, yes, I know you're there. I'll ask you to keep listening. I always admire the curious. Those who chase voices into the dark. My hand hovered above the dial. I didn't turn it. Couldn't. I wanted to hear more. Needed to. Because this wasn't a story. It wasn't satire. It felt like instruction. Real. Like something ancient had borrowed a transmitter, cloaked itself in a calm tone, and started speaking truths it had waited far too long to say. We don't take from the strong. We don't feed from the loud. We look for the quiet ones. The soft-spoken. The ones who walk alone, not because they're lost, but because they've stopped expecting to be found. There was a tenderness in that, a kind of twisted reverence. And for a moment, I didn't know who I was in the story. The predator? The prey? Or the one who can't look away? The voice continued, steady and smooth. I'll be sharing a few basic tips tonight. Just the basics. How to detect guilt, how to read tension in someone's posture, and how to make someone want to be seen. I pressed record on the tape deck, because even though I didn't know what I was listening to, part of me knew I'd never find this station again. Not by accident. And the voice, whoever or whatever was knew it too. We have rules, you see, not because we're afraid, but because we've learned too much indulgence turns even a mortal sloppy. A pause, and then softly, shall we begin? I leaned in closer to the speaker, like I was listening for more than just words. I swear, for just a second, I felt the voice lean back. Listening too. The voice didn't jump into blood and teeth the way you might expect. No gothic fanfare, no threats, just a calm, almost academic continuation, as if the whole thing was a masterclass and we were all eager students. There's a difference between a meal and a mess. Too many of the young ones forget that. The way he said, young ones, sent a chill down my back. It wasn't patronizing, it was patient, even affectionate. Like someone who's seen centuries pile up and watched the same mistakes repeat in different cities, different styles, different accents. Always the same hunger. Always the same errors. Hunting, my listeners, isn't about domination. It's about permission. You think I'm being poetic? No, I mean that in the purest sense. A clean feed happens when the soul opens first. That line stuck with me. I didn't understand it at first. A soul opening? Like a door? A book? But he explained, you don't need to corner them. You don't need to scare them. In fact, fear taints the taste. It's like drinking wine from a dirty glass. No, you invite the feed. You shape the moment around it. You let them feel seen, then missed, then wanted. Only then do you take. I didn't know whether to be horrified or impressed. There was something disturbing in how delicate his words were. This wasn't a monster grunting in the shadows. This was a craftsman, an artist, someone who saw feeding not as survival, but as communion. Never chase, never rush. That's what animals do. And we are not animals, are we? We are historians of blood, archivists of memory. The hunt is a conversation. That one hit hard, because even though the voice was openly explaining how to find and feed on humans, it didn't sound like murder. It sounded like intimacy. Twisted, sure, but precise. The voice shifted then, softened again. And remember, etiquette is everything. Clean up. Never leave bruises where they'll raise questions. Learn the names of the lonely ones before you taste them. Say it gently into their thoughts like a prayer. Some part of them always remembers that. Then he laughed. Just once. A low, dark chuckle that didn't feel cruel, just knowing. The old ones taught me that in the catacombs beneath Paris. Back when we had to whisper over candlelight and fear our own kind more than hunters. That was before the wars. Before the thin bloods started turning recklessly. Now they bite on impulse. Leave bodies behind clubs. Hide nothing. Pretend we are shadows when they move like wolves. His disappointment was quiet, almost mournful. It felt less like a critique and more like an elegy. For a lost art, a forgotten discipline. The way some old musicians talk about vinyl or librarians whisper about burned books. I don't blame them. Hunger is loud. I've screamed through it myself. But there's power in silence, my friends. Power in patience. That was the theme, really, patience. He wasn't just instructing. He was remembering. 1,000 years of dark hallways, closed doors, whispered names. And we were eavesdropping on it, hearing something no living person was ever meant to hear. And then, with a tone that almost sounded like a toast. To feed well is to listen well. To take only what's given. And to leave behind only sleep and a smile and a memory no one can quite place. The silence after that line was thick, heavy. I sat there, blinking at the speaker, feeling the weight of everything he didn't say. Because for all the civility, for all the charm, there was one fact I couldn't forget. His voice had fed, not once, but countless times, and I had no doubt he would feed again. The voice didn't fade out or reset. It just flowed like it had all night to explain, and we had all night to listen. And maybe we did. I certainly wasn't changing the station now. Not because I was trapped, but because I didn't want to miss anything. Now that we've talked about restraint, let's talk about where to apply it. He said it like a travel agent might, with a faint grin behind every word. This wasn't about shadows and alleys anymore. This was logistics, strategy. Hunting isn't about darkness. Not really. Darkness is convenient. But the best places to feed? They're bright. They're busy. They're loud enough that no one looks too closely. The irony wasn't lost on me. He continued. Large cities offer a buffet, of course. New York, London, Sao Paulo, Tokyo. Noise and movement. Loneliness in high definition. You'd think the crowd makes it harder. It doesn't. It makes people more invisible, more forgettable. You'd be surprised how many humans disappear quietly in the middle of everyone. He made it sound easy. Too easy. But don't misunderstand. We don't take bodies. We take moments. A sip, a breath, a slice of memory, and we let them go. It's better that way. Cleaner. Some even feel better afterward. Like a weight lifted they never noticed carrying. I swallowed hard. It wasn't because I was afraid. Well, maybe I was, but because part of me didn't want to believe how natural it all sounded. Subways are excellent. Quiet corners of public parks. Rooftops where the tired sit to smoke and think about the days they don't want to repeat. Airports are gold mines, if you know how to listen for the travelers who don't expect to return. It was becoming clearer now. He didn't just hunt the vulnerable. He hunted the overlooked, the kind of people who drift just beneath the surface of everyday life. Not dramatic enough to be noticed, not loud enough to be missed. He chuckled softly. Rural towns? Less ideal. Too many questions. Everyone knows everyone, and strangers glow like fireflies. Not worth the scrutiny. Though, In the right moment, even a roadside diner can offer an opportunity. His voice lowered then, like he was recalling something recent, something almost fond. I once fed in a laundromat, Midwest, 3 a.m., a young man who hadn't spoken to anyone in days. We sat in silence for 20 minutes. He looked at me once, smiled, and said, "It's nice to have company." That was all I needed. And the way he said it, you could tell he meant it. That it wasn't just about blood. It was about connection, however fleeting, however false. We aren't hunters because we're predators. We're hunters because we know where to look. Loneliness glows, my dear listeners. It hums. It calls. And if you're quiet enough, it leads you right where you need to go. I found myself glancing around my studio. The empty chairs, the blank phone lines, the silence between songs. Had I ever considered how much I was broadcasting to no one? Or maybe to someone I didn't know was listening? The trick, of course, is to never overstay. Feed and vanish. Gratitude, not greed. That's how you stay free. That's how you stay fed. You don't live this long by being reckless. Another pause. Another soft breath of static. Then quieter, almost himself. And remember, my young ones, location isn't just about place. It's about time. The right moment is a place too. Learn to find it. That line stayed with me. The right moment is a place too. He was speaking about hunger, about feeding, but it felt deeper than that. Like he was reminding me of something I'd forgotten. How moments shape us. How timing can define who we become, or what we lose. I didn't turn off the radio. I just listened. And I swear, I think he was still listening back. By now, I'd stopped pretending I was just an observer. Some part of me, whether it wanted to or not, had become involved. You don't sit through a voice like that, a broadcast like that, and stay neutral. The air in the room felt different now. Not heavy, not cold, but tuned to something deeper. Like the sound itself was aware of me, adjusting its shape to fit around my breath, my heartbeat. The voice returned after a long silence. Not rushed, not impatient, just present. It's not about how they walk or what they wear. You want to read a human properly? Watch how they react to emptiness. That's how the lesson started. Not with instructions, but with observation. The most vulnerable aren't always the ones crying in public or slumped over on a park bench. No. The ones worth watching, they're the ones who pause in elevators, who linger too long at crosswalks, the ones who don't pull out their phones when they're alone. He wasn't mocking. He wasn't gloating. He was studying. This was anthropology wrapped in silk. He was a predator who had spent centuries decoding the people he fed on, not out of cruelty, but out of precision. Humans are creatures of rhythm. You learn their beats, you learn everything. Watch how they sit when no one's watching, where they position themselves on a crowded bus, which direction they look when silence falls. He described it like music, like each movement was a note in a larger song. He didn't see people. He saw patterns, posture, eye contact, the tempo of how someone closes a door. You want to know when to approach? Look for the stutter in their motion, the delay before they respond, a moment of internal checking. That's your opening. That's your invitation. I found myself nodding, and it scared me. It wasn't because I agreed, but because I understood. I could see it. I could remember moments in my own life when I hesitated. Moments when someone like him might have seen me and thought, now's the time. Avoid the rehearsed ones, the overconfident, the loud-laughing performers. They aren't strong, they're just braced. You don't want resistance. You want softness, not weakness. Availability. There's a difference. The word availability sent a chill through me. He used it clinically, like a surgeon identifying viable tissue. And here's the part most new bloods miss: empathy. Real, practiced empathy. Not as a trick, but as a tool. If you cannot feel what they feel, even for a moment, you cannot drink from them cleanly. You must align, however briefly. It makes the memory sweeter. So it was about more than blood. It was about resonance. Match. Frequency. Don't just approach the hungry. Approach the hollow. The ones who echo inside. They won't even flinch when you step into them. They'll think they pulled you in. He said it gently, like a lullaby. And for a moment, I had this awful, beautiful thought. What if I'd already been fed on once? What if that night, years ago, when I fell asleep in a stranger's apartment and woke up inexplicably calm, was one of them? What if I never noticed? The voice paused again, as if it knew I was thinking that, as if it was waiting for the question to form. The perfect feed leaves no fear, no trauma, just a faint sense of being seen, a dream that doesn't quite fade. That's when you know you've done it right. Not because they remember, but because they feel remembered. That was it. That was the horror right there. Not the blood, not the bite, but the intimacy. The way he turned consumption into connection. The way he made you feel like it was you who reached out first. Understand their patterns, yes. But more than that, learn their silences. That's where they keep the parts no one else has touched. That's where we drink from. That's where the flavor lives. And just like that, the radio went silent again. Not off, not gone, just waiting. Like it knew the next part wouldn't land unless we sat with this one for a while. Unless we turned our heads, looked at the people around us, or maybe just at ourselves, and asked, how much of me is visible? And how much is waiting to be found? I didn't change the station. I wasn't sure I ever would again. By this point, I think I'd accepted it. This wasn't a late-night prank or an elaborate podcast with a clever premise. This voice, this vampire was real. Or, at least, it was real enough to matter. It was real enough to speak truths that I hadn't heard in any classroom, sermon, or survival guide. And tonight, the lesson shifted again. Disguise isn't just about fabric, my darklings. It's not the trench coat or the dark glasses or the affected accent. It's about expectation, about mirroring what they want to see. That was the first line after a long pause, and I felt it settle over me like smoke. Humans believe what fits the story they're already telling themselves. You don't need to look harmless. You just need to look like someone else's problem. He laughed, low and warm. The best hunters? They look tired, slightly unkempt. Not so strange they draw curiosity, but just enough to seem ordinary, a little invisible. The kind of person someone notices only long enough to look away. It wasn't bragging. He wasn't giving away trade secrets like some game show host of the undead. He was reminiscing, reflecting, like a tailor describing the ideal cut of cloth. Once, in the 40s, I went a whole year looking like a traveling insurance adjuster. Slouched jacket, briefcase. No one asked questions. Not because I was convincing, because no one wanted to know more. He spoke of masks the way most people speak of second homes. Not with anxiety, but with fondness, with craft, with pride in how well they blended in. And decor matters. Politeness. Posture. Learn to shake hands properly, if that's still what people do in your corner of the world. Offer to carry something heavy. Hold a door. Look weary, not predatory. He made it sound so basic, so painfully human, as if the boundary between monster and man wasn't a line, but a tone. A posture. A practiced yawn. The trick isn't hiding. The trick is being just visible enough to pass through suspicion untouched. Familiarity, not forgettability. That's the balance. I realized then that I'd seen people like that. All the time. The ones who don't quite belong, but never trigger alarm. The ones who sit alone on buses and trains with the kind of silence that feels intentional. Not shy, not afraid, just waiting for something you can't quite name. We aren't invisible, no matter what the stories say. That would be cheating. We're just good at looking like background noise. Like the second extra from the left in a crowd scene. There, but not there. And then he lowered his voice just slightly. The kind of shift that makes you lean closer without realizing. But every now and then, someone sees us, really sees us, and we know, we feel it, that awareness, that pull, that subtle, nearly imperceptible shift in gaze that says, you don't belong here, do you? And those, my listeners, those are the dangerous ones. I swallowed, because I think I'd been that person once or twice. Not often, but I remember that feeling, that flash of something off, the way your brain catches on a detail and refuses to move past it. You don't run from those people. You respect them. You nod. You step back into the shadows and let them pass. Because anyone who can spot you without reason, they've either seen too much already, or they're one of us and just haven't remembered yet. I wasn't sure if that was a warning or a recruitment. Maybe both. The voice paused, softer now, more intimate. So be kind, be still, and above all, be believable. No one fears what they think they understand. And just like that, the lesson ended. No recap, no call to action, just silence, the kind that fills the room without sound. In that stillness, I found myself wondering not about the monsters I'd feared in alleyways or stories, but about the people who held the door for me, nodded politely, and walked past without leaving a trace. I started to think those were the ones I should have watched more closely. The next segment didn't begin with a greeting. No smooth introduction, no theatrical pause. The voice just resumed like we were in the middle of a thought, like we'd been sitting together in comfortable silence, and he was ready to continue. The hardest thing to teach the young is when to walk away. It was quieter than before, not in volume, just in tone. There was a weight in it, a weariness. Hunger lies. It makes you greedy. It tells you now is better than later, that this one won't notice, that no one will care. But hunger is impatient, and impatience is what gets us caught. He wasn't chastising. This wasn't discipline. It was regret. You don't feed when you're angry. Never. That's when mistakes happen. When the lines blur, you start to think taking is power, not necessity. That's when you start breaking rules. That's when you leave marks. He paused there, and I thought maybe he was remembering something. A mistake, a moment, a name. We are not gods. We're echoes. We survive by restraint, not by dominance. The world doesn't fear the hidden, it fears the messy. Be clean, be invisible, and if something in your gut says no, listen to it. I found myself holding my breath, not because I was scared, but because the voice was so controlled, so deliberate. There was no rush in him, no hunger anymore, just discipline and something like grief. There are people who shine too brightly. Don't touch them, not because they're protected, not because they're watched, because they burn, because something in them glows too loud. And when you try to drink from that, it scars you. The way he said it, it wasn't metaphorical. He meant it literally. I tried once. She was radiant, not in beauty or youth, but in spirit. Her laughter lingered in the air for minutes after she had finished laughing. I thought I could take just enough. I couldn't. She knew. She looked at me as I leaned in, and she knew. No fear, just sadness. And I couldn't do it. I haven't fed in a year. That silence that followed wasn't static. It was mourning. Not every hunger deserves to be answered. Some are meant to be endured. Some are meant to change you. He shifted again, this time back to the teaching voice, but it was softer now, not so polished. There are also times when the world is simply wrong. Too loud, too aware. After disasters, after funerals, after headlines that shake a nation. Everyone is watching everyone. And more importantly, everyone remembers everything. You don't hunt during grief. You wait. He sounded tired, like this was a lesson he'd had to repeat too many times over too many centuries. Feed only when the world has forgotten itself again, when the crowd has gone quiet, when no one's looking at shadows. It wasn't about fear of getting caught. It was reverence. The hunt, to him, was something sacred. You don't barge into a cathedral during a wedding and scream. You don't feed in chaos. It ruins the taste. I've gone decades without drinking, not because I had to, because it was right, because some seasons demand silence, and because I've learned that hunger sharpens the memory. Another pause, this one long. I almost thought he was done. Then, you don't just remember the ones you fed on. You remember the ones you didn't, sometimes more clearly. He didn't explain that. He didn't need to. We all have our moments of restraint. The night we almost said something, the day we nearly left, the person we let walk away. And maybe monsters, real monsters, carry those too. The young always ask how often they should feed. I tell them, as rarely as you can, and as deeply as you must. Then silence again, final for now, and I think that silence was the point. Because sometimes the lesson isn't about how to do something. Sometimes it's about knowing when not to. I don't know when I stopped hearing him as just a voice and started hearing him as a person. Perhaps it was the weight behind his words. Or maybe it was the way he spoke with a kind of fragile authority, like someone who has lived too long and remembers everything a little too clearly. Whatever it was, though, I wasn't just listening anymore. I was following him. He came back on the air with something quieter this time. Blood carries many things. Warmth, yes. Strength, sure. But the most intoxicating thing it carries is memory. There was no dramatic pause. No punch of horror. Just that simple, aching truth, like he was speaking about love or loss or both. When we drink, we don't just eat. We feel. For a moment, just a heartbeat, we become them. We taste their memories, their dreams, and the things they're ashamed to say out loud. It's not control. It's communion. He said it with reverence, like a priest handling relics. Not gloating, not even enjoying it exactly, just respecting the ritual. The first time I drank from someone who truly suffered, I wept for an hour. Not because I pitied them, but because I understood. Because I held something they didn't even know they carried anymore. He talked about it like it was art, and in a way it was a grotesque kind of intimacy. One-sided maybe, but not hollow. It's why some of us go years without feeding. Not out of virtue, out of fear. Because once you taste too much of the world, you stop remembering what's yours. I stared at the radio, heart thudding. That line, that you stop remembering what's yours, unsettled me more than anything else so far. If he'd lived for centuries, how much of him was left? How many names did he still carry? How many did he confuse with his own? And there are moments, rare, beautiful moments, where you drink from someone and it's like finding a mirror you never knew existed. Their story fits into yours so perfectly, it aches. Like you were waiting for them. Like your hunger had a face all along. He didn't say whether he sought those moments or feared them. Maybe both. Some of us chase that feeling. We call it the crimson echo. That resonance. You'll hear them talk about it in the old cities, in the circles that still follow the old ways. They say one echo in 1,000 leaves a mark. He trailed off for a second, as if he was somewhere else entirely. I had an echo once. Her blood tasted like rainfall on burned paper, like the sound of a piano no one had touched in decades. It wasn't about love. It was about recognition, like we'd both come from the same storm and just forgot until we met. He paused. I didn't move. She never knew, of course. That's the rule. They don't remember us. Not really. We make sure of that. But I remembered her. Still do. There was a silence after that, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like standing in an old room where someone once wept. You think immortality makes us monsters. It doesn't. Hunger does. And memory. We drown in it. We walk through it like fog. Every street reminds us of someone. Every name echoes back. You start to lose shape. He sighed, not theatrically, just softly. Honestly, that's why we don't feed often. That's why some of us turn to broadcast instead of blood. Because voices let us remember without tasting. That hit something in me. Something real. Because here he was something older than my country, maybe older than this language, and he was speaking not with hunger, but with longing. Not to terrify, but to tell someone, anyone, this is what it feels like to remember everything and still be alone. The taste fades eventually, but the echo doesn't. You carry it, and if you're lucky, it doesn't carry you. And then, as if shaking off the weight of it all, tomorrow, I'll teach you how to read posture at a glance. But tonight, maybe just sit with this. Every person you pass on the street is a story you'll never fully know. We get to hold some just for a moment, and then the static crept back in. Not loud, just enough to remind you the voice was gone again, or maybe waiting, and I sat there, alone in the dark, wondering how many of my memories were really mine. When the voice returned, there was something different in the cadence. Not exactly tired, not melancholy, just softer, like we were shifting from lecture to correspondence, from one voice to many, from the theoretical to the lived. Tonight, instead of just my voice, I've decided to read a few excerpts. Field notes, you could call them. Stories from those like me, written in ink or whisper, pass between us through back channels that don't always use wires. He sounded almost amused by the idea that the ancients still had systems older than the internet, older than the telephone, maybe even older than language. These are not instructions. These are reflections. And like all reflections, they warp in the telling. The first was short, a few lines, spoken with deliberate care. Fed last night in a back alley 2 blocks from the cathedral. She cried, but not from fear, from release. Said she felt lighter afterward. I didn't take much, just enough to remember the scent of lavender and exhaustion. He let that sit for a while. No follow-up, no analysis. Just the quiet, vivid echo of a moment we weren't meant to see. The second was darker. Tried to feed in a city I didn't know. Got careless. Picked someone to watch too wanted. Her brother followed me for 6 blocks. I didn't feed, just vanished. But he remembered my face. I won't go back there again. This time, the host did comment. Even now, with all our rules, all our elegance, we still forget. People are rarely truly alone. And love is more dangerous than garlic or crosses. It gives humans courage we don't anticipate. The third letter wasn't a letter at all. It was a transcript of a conversation, if you could believe it. Do you want to hurt me? She asked. No, I said. Then why are you looking at me like that? I told her, because you remind me of someone I haven't forgotten yet. And she smiled, and I walked away without feeding. He laughed, not cruelly, just softly, like someone who's read too many stories that end the same way. We don't always need to feed. Sometimes we just need to be seen. And sometimes they do too. There was a fourth note. This one, the voice read more slowly. I could hear the weight in it, the care, the reluctance, fed on a man who'd already decided to die. He was sitting on a bench at dawn, waiting for nothing. I didn't take much, but when I left, he stood up, walked away. I don't know if I saved him. I don't think that's the right word, but I remember the way his heartbeat changed. He remembered, too, just enough. Then silence again, a long, thoughtful pause. We don't talk about these things much, not because we're hiding, but because we know how fragile they are. These moments, these glimpses, they aren't victories. They're exchanges, not always fair, but sometimes meaningful. And then, more quietly, even now, after all these years, it's not the hunger that keeps me awake. It's the stories, the way they tangle, the way they stay. He sighed, like a musician lowering his instrument between songs. Field notes don't teach you how to feed. They teach you why we choose not to, sometimes. They remind us that every person has a name, and some of those names linger in the mouth long after the blood is gone. And with that, the voice faded again, leaving behind nothing but the static hum. And for once, it didn't feel like absence. It felt like breath, like the kind of silence you hold after someone trusts you with a secret. The silence didn't last long this time. When the voice returned, it came with less ceremony. No elegant turn of phrase, no slow entry. Just presence, like a companion resuming a conversation you'd both agreed to continue in your own time. There's a point where hunger becomes habit. That's when you're most dangerous. Not because you're starving, but because you've stopped noticing. His tone wasn't judgmental. It was reflective, honest in a way only someone who'd done it wrong could be. The first few decades, you think about every feed. You remember names, cities, seasons, the color of the walls, the kind of music playing in the background. But later, it becomes background noise. You start to feed between moments. Half aware, half ear. He paused, like he was chewing on that thought, like it bothered him. That's the part that scares me the most, not losing control. Losing care. I felt that too, in a way that had nothing to do with blood or immortality. I've seen people lose the thread of their own lives, go through days like ghosts. They eat, sleep, and speak without being present. I think that's what he was warning about. I had a stretch once. I don't know, maybe the early 1800s. I moved through 6 cities in 4 years. Fed nearly every night. No rituals, no conversation, just need. Quick, clean, efficient. And by the end of it, I couldn't remember a single face. He let that confession sit there, raw and unadorned. That's when I stopped. Cold. Didn't feed for a decade. I wanted to feel hunger again, to feel anything again. There was a vulnerability to that, almost human. The idea that even predators can become numb, that even ancient creatures can lose their way without realizing it. You know how you start noticing the world again? You slow down. You let yourself starve a little. You remember that every moment is unique, that every person is more than a vein beneath the skin. That, he said with something like reverence, like someone who'd seen too many sunrises he wasn't supposed to and lived to carry the weight of all of them. Years later, I met a woman in Berlin. She was older. She was fragile in the way people are when they know they're near the end and have made peace with it. I asked her name before I fed her. I held her hand. I let her speak. Afterward, she looked at me, not afraid or empty, but grateful. Not because I took something, She was grateful because I listened. And again, that silence. Not absence, not dead air, just pause. Like he wanted us to sit with it. Really sit with it. That's the part they don't tell you about hunger. It's not just appetite. It's attention. What you focus on, what you let blur. It defines you. He shifted slightly, the tone softening. So here's a trick for those of you listening and feeling that pull more than you should. Keep a journal. Write down every feed, every name, every place. If you can't remember why you chose them, don't feed. If you can't write their story, don't take from them. And I thought, what a terrifying kind of ethics. Not rules made of law or threat, rules made of memory. We aren't beasts, not because we don't kill, but because we remember who we could have been and choose every night whether to be that or something else. And finally, with a voice barely above a whisper, you are what you do when no one's watching. And sometimes, not feeding is the loudest thing you can do. The station stayed open after that, humming low and soft. Not gone, just waiting. And in the quiet, I realized the most haunting part wasn't the blood or the darkness. It was how much of this wasn't about monsters at all. The next time a voice came through, it sounded different, not in tone, but in weight. It was as if this wasn't something he meant to share, but rather something that insisted on being told. They're not supposed to remember. That's the point. The glamour, the trance, the way we slide out of their minds like fog, through fingers, it's all designed for forgetfulness. Clean exits, quiet nights. There was a pause. One of those long, considered silences. Not for drama, for honesty. But sometimes they do. That line settled in the room like a cold breath. I leaned forward without meaning to. Once every few hundred, you'll find one. A person with a mind like a mirror. Polished, still, and sharp enough to hold the shape of what they saw, even when they shouldn't. And when they remember, they don't scream. They don't run. He sounded almost reverent. They watch. I thought about that. About being on the other side of it. About waking up and knowing something had changed, something you couldn't explain or name, but felt. I met one like that in Prague. 1973, a violinist. I thought she'd forget. Most do. But weeks later, I heard her playing a melody I'd hummed under my breath during the feed. A song I hadn't sung in centuries. She played it note for note. She was waiting. Another pause. Not heavy, not sad. Just real. I sat beside her after the concert. She looked at me once. No fear. No anger. Just recognition. Like someone who finds a photo of a dream they never told anyone about. He didn't say what happened next. I didn't ask. There's another kind. The half-rememberers. The ones who don't know what they saw, but carry the shape of it. They draw things. Write strange poems. Paint eyes in the margins of notebooks. They don't know why, but they know. And that was the most haunting thing he'd said all night. Because suddenly, I was thinking about all the weird dreams I'd brushed off. The faces I couldn't place. The times I'd woken with a name in my mouth I'd never spoken aloud. What if those weren't just dreams? We don't seek them out. Not because they're dangerous. Because they're real. They tether us. Remind us we're not invisible. That we leave marks, no matter how careful we think we are. His voice dipped lower then, almost embarrassed. We call them anchors. Not a technical term, just something passed down. A whispered phrase among old blood. Careful, that one's an anchor. Like folklore, like respect. I sat there, trying to remember if I'd ever met someone like that. Or if I was someone like that. If someone, somewhere, was whispering about me right now. We don't know why it happens. Bloodline? Trauma? Faith? Some say it's the soul refusing to forget what it knows is real. Others say it's love. Not romantic love, just recognition. The kind that lives in silence. In stillness. He sighed, not tired, just thoughtful. I've only fed on 3 who remembered. Each one changed me more than a century of shadows ever could. That struck me. The way he said, changed me. Like they'd given something he didn't even know he needed. If you're listening to this, and something in you remembers a shape in the dark, a voice that never left you, or a night you've tried to forget, maybe you're one of them. And then quieter, as if speaking directly through the static to someone specific. And if that's the case, thank you. The line didn't cut off. It just dissolved like steam fading into air. Nothing final, nothing certain. just a presence retreating gently into silence. And I sat there, wondering if I'd ever been remembered, or if I already had, and just didn't know it yet. This time, the voice returned with less warmth. It wasn't cold, just more formal and deliberate, as if someone had stepped onto a different kind of stage. I could hear it in the rhythm and the way each word was chosen. This was older knowledge now. Not memory, but doctrine. We don't write them down anymore. Too dangerous. Too easy to twist. But the old laws still exist. Etched not in books, but in blood. In whispers. In the way we carry ourselves when we're alone. I felt myself tense. Not from fear exactly. From curiosity. Because this was the kind of thing I wasn't supposed to hear. Rules that predated reason. Rituals that had survived the centuries like seeds waiting for the right soil. The first law, do not turn without cause. That hit harder than I expected, because up until now, he hadn't said much about turning, about making others like him. It's not a gift, not a curse. It's a burden, one you carry forever. Turning should be the last act, not the first impulse. You don't give someone the dark just because you're lonely. He said it like he'd broken that rule once. Or nearly had. The second law, do not feed where grief is fresh. He touched on this before, but now it sounded official. More than advice, something older, heavier. Grief sharpens memory, makes the mind cling. If you feed from someone grieving, you don't just drink blood, you drink the wound. And sometimes it stays with you. For years, centuries. He paused, like he was remembering one that never faded. The third law, leave no echoes near children. That one chilled me. Not because they're dangerous, because they believe. And belief leaves doors open long after they should be shut. A child who sees us might forget your face, but they'll remember the feeling, the shift in the air, and they'll spend their lives looking for it again. I thought back, of course I did, to those nights I'd felt watched. The dreams that came too vivid, too early. The sense that something had brushed past me, but never explained why. We obey these laws not because we are noble, because we must, because without them, we become nothing but hunger wrapped in flesh. His voice softened. There are others, hundreds, depending on where you are, who raised you. But those three, those are the ones that keep us tethered to meaning. He shifted tone slightly then, like setting down a heavy book. There's always some who break them. The new bloods, the wild ones, the arrogant. They think the laws are relics. Chains, but they're scaffolding. Without them, we collapse inward. I sat there wondering if these laws were ever enforced. Was there someone or something watching watchers? But he answered before I could finish my thought. We police ourselves, not out of pride, out of survival. When one of us breaks too loudly, too often, we end it. No ceremony, no indulgence, just end it. It's not revenge, it's preservation. A broken law doesn't just stain the one who broke it. It poisons the rest of us, makes us visible, makes us monsters, and then quieter, almost like confession. I've had in too, both younger than me. One too reckless, one too angry. I didn't hate them. That's what made it harder. That silence again, not for effect, for grief. The laws don't make us good, but they keep us from becoming worse. Their memory wrapped in warning. You let the air settle after that. And finally, remember, this world isn't ours. We walk through it as shadows. We are not the main characters. The moment we forget that, the laws remind us. Then static. Not cold, not harsh. Just the kind that lets you sit with what you've heard. Because rules only matter when they're broken. And it felt like we were getting closer to someone who had. The voice came back slower this time, quieter. The kind of voice you lean into without meaning to. Not dramatic, just intimate. Like he was about to say something he hadn't told anyone in a long time. There's something we don't like to talk about. Not among ourselves. Not even alone, really. Not out loud. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Sometimes, when you feed, you hear things. He paused. Let that settle. Not memories. Not thoughts. Not echoes of a life slipping through your fingers. I mean something else. Like a voice that isn't theirs. Or yours. Something older. Something deep. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck rise. It wasn't what he was saying, it was how he said it. Like a priest explaining a forbidden scripture. Careful, reluctant, We call it the Red Whisper. He didn't embellish it. No Gothic flourish. Just that quiet phrase, like a door creaking open in a part of the house you'd forgotten existed. You only hear it once in a great while. Maybe one feed in 1,000. And you can't predict it. It doesn't happen with old blood or new blood or broken minds. It just happens. He went silent for a moment. I could almost imagine him sitting in some ruined stone chamber, the radio mic casting a faint glow on his face. I've heard it 3 times. His voice changed then, tightened, like saying that out loud made it more real. The first time, I thought I was losing my mind. I was feeding on a man in Paris, quiet, unremarkable, dying of something his doctors hadn't found yet. And just as his pulse slowed, I heard a word. Not French, not Latin, not anything I knew. It echoed in my spine. He didn't say what the word was. He didn't have to. The second time was worse. It was a song. Low, discordant, like a hymn written in reverse. It made my teeth ache. I stopped feeding before I meant to. The man didn't wake. I left. I didn't feed again for 5 years. I felt myself shiver. And the third, I won't describe. Not because I can't. Because I won't. He let that hang. Not for tension. For safety. Some believe it's a remnant of something older. Pre-blood. Pre-language. A voice that echoes through the hunger itself. Like a fracture in the nature of feeding. Like we're tapping into something we were never meant to touch. I suddenly wasn't sure if I was still listening to a radio show, or if the radio was listening back. It doesn't change you overnight, but it stays. You dream differently. You remember things you never lived. Your shadow doesn't always move the same way. He chuckled, dry and small. I know I sound mad. I probably am. But if you speak with the ancients, those who no longer feed, the ones who've gone silent beneath cities and sand, you'll see it in their eyes. They've heard it too. There is something heartbreaking in that. The idea that immortality doesn't just wear down the body, but the soul. That some voices follow you through centuries, whispering things no one should hear. The Red Whisper isn't a threat. Not in the way fire or stakes or silver are. It doesn't kill. It reminds. He let that sentence fall apart at the edges, like even he wasn't sure what it meant. Some say it's the voice of the first one, the origin, the thing that made the first drink. Others say it's the hunger itself, trying to speak, trying to teach, or warn. Another pause. Then, with the kind of sadness you don't fake. Or maybe it's just us, the part of us we've forgotten, trying to claw its way back. And then, softer than I thought his voice could go. If you hear it, don't chase it. Don't answer it. Don't speak it aloud. Just remember who you were before. Then silence. Total this time. No crackle. No hum. Just absence. And I sat there, hands cold, heart loud in my chest. I believed him. Even worse, some part of me understood what he meant. And I didn't want to know why. It began differently this time. No prologue. No tension. Just a soft breath, a moment of pause, and then, even we need places to go when it gets too loud. His voice had changed again. Less teacher, more weary traveler. Like someone remembering old roads that no longer exist. They're called sanctuaries. Not churches. Not hideouts. Sanctuaries. The word matters. He let that distinction settle, then continued. They're not marked on maps. They don't show up on satellites. You find them the same way you find sleep when you're exhausted. You drift toward them. I imagine that. Walking through unfamiliar streets, alleys curling into places they weren't supposed to go, and somehow ending up somewhere that felt older than the city around it. There's one beneath a bookshop in Buenos Aires. The air there smells like dust and candle wax, and the floor creaks when no one's walking. You won't find it if you're looking too hard. You have to let the hunger lead. Just enough. He said it like it was sacred. Another one lives under a tree in Kyoto. The roots curve like rib bones, and you sit in the dirt while the wind tells stories you don't quite understand. You don't feed there. You remember. That's the rule. He described a few more, each one stranger than the last. A basement that only opens on the second Wednesday of the month. A mirror that reflects the person you were the night you first fed. A pool of water so still it shows you places that no longer exist. And with each one, I felt something shift. These weren't places of hiding. They were places of reckoning. We don't go to sanctuaries to escape. We go to remember what silence feels like, what restraint looks like, what we used to be, There was reverence in his voice now. Not nostalgia, not guilt, something older, like grief that's had time to settle into wisdom. The young ones don't visit. They think they're just stories. And maybe that's for the best. Some stories should stay quiet until you need them. He paused then, and I heard it again, that echo of something unsaid. Like there was a name he was holding back. I found one once in the desert. No walls, just stones stacked in a circle. In the center was an old woman, blind, silent. She hadn't fed in decades. But when I sat beside her, I remember the name of the first person I ever drank from. That's when I realized sanctuaries don't protect you from the world. They protect the world from you. We leave pieces of ourselves behind in those places. Not blood, not flesh, just memory, guilt, hope, whatever's too heavy to carry. He cleared his throat, not theatrically, like someone trying not to choke on something old and bitter. One day, I'll leave my voice behind in one of them. Maybe this broadcast, maybe what you're hearing now, a fragment caught in the walls, waiting for someone else to find it. He didn't explain how that worked, but I believed him. If you ever stumble into a place that feels like silence has weight, don't run. Don't speak. Just listen. And maybe you'll hear someone like me, reminding you not to forget who you are. That was it. No warnings. No lessons. Just a promise, wrapped in stillness. Then, like fog retreating from sunlight, the voice was gone. Only quiet remained, but it didn't feel empty. It felt held. The voice returned like it had been waiting, not for the right moment, but for the moment when everything else had quieted down. No more instructions. No more stories from the road. Just breath. A final thought, maybe, or a confession. There comes a night in every long life when you take your last feed. It wasn't dramatic. He said it plainly, like a man explaining the end of a shift, the end of a season, the inevitability of it. It's not about age. Not really. It's about weight. You carry enough memories, enough names, enough silence. And eventually, you don't need more. You're full. You let that word linger. Full. Like it was both a blessing and a burden. Some of us fight it. Keep feeding long after the flavor fades. Hoping for a thrill, a spark, a connection. But all we find is the echo of what used to be. He sounded tired. Not weak. Just finished. My last feed was 32 years ago. A man on a bus bench outside San Diego. He had a book in his hands. Dog-eared. Science fiction. The kind of story that believes in impossible futures. I waited, heart slow, breath shallow. He looked up at me and smiled before I even said a word. Like he knew. And he said, "If you need something, just take it. I've got more than I need." His voice didn't break, but it dipped. Deep. Weighted with something heavy. I only took a little. But in that moment, I saw a life lived wide open. He'd lost things. Deep, painful things. But he'd never shut down. Never turned cold. That kind of openness, it scars you when you taste it. He paused. Not for effect. For truth. I walked away shaking. Not from hunger, but from clarity. I didn't want to take from anyone after that. Not because I was noble. Because I couldn't. There was a long silence. And when he spoke again, it was quieter than ever. Since then, I've wandered. I speak. I remember. I teach. And I let the hunger fade. It's still there. It always is. But I've made peace with it. Like an old injury. Like a ghost you stop trying to exorcise. He shifted, the sound of something soft brushing against the mic. Maybe cloth. Maybe skin. This broadcast, it's been my way of feeding without feeding. Of giving back something small. A story. A warning. A little company for anyone out there who might need it. The air grew still. I could hear the static now. Not sharp, not broken. Just a soft thread between worlds. And maybe that's why I started this. Not to speak to the others, but to speak to you. I froze. Because in that moment, it didn't feel like a metaphor. It felt direct. You've been listening longer than you meant to. That's how it happens. The voice wraps around you. The night gets quieter. The rest of the world fades. He sighed, like he'd been waiting to release that breath for decades. If you remember nothing else, remember this. Hunger doesn't define you. What you do with it does. You can carry it without letting it consume you. Another pause. One last truth, coiled in words. I was a monster once, and then I chose not to be. Not all at once. Just once. And then again. And again. And that's how it starts. And then, as if he could feel the edge approaching. So, if this is the last time you hear me, know that I was real. And that you were too. There was a sound then. A door, maybe wind. Something that felt like an ending. And then the broadcast went quiet. Not off. Not cut. Just quiet. And in that quiet, I realized something I hadn't understood until now. This wasn't just a story about a vampire. It was a story about memory. About restraint. And what about the small, quiet choices that make us human, even when we're not?